it's Karen. I'm glad you're here today because I've got a video that is all about using this really quite inexpensive border die from Paper Rose Studio. Now, I know that's fairly specific, but I think if you look in your stash, you may find you've got other dies that could be suited to some of these cards that I'm going to show you today. So keep that in mind. These are two other Paper Rose dies that I think could also work with these cards today. But the first card I'm doing today is very much how I think this die was meant to be used. I've done some ink smooshing on my background with those Catherine Pooler inks, and I have now colored in and fussy cut out this Big Bloom stamp set. And my background is actually a 5.5 inch square. And I thought I was going to use this horizontal die in this direction at the bottom. You'll see I changed my mind, but I've cut that out. Now this was an extra piece of ink smushed background that I had, and I've just put some Nuvo Moonstone glimmer paste on that, and once it dried I am now going to glue that down, and you can see I've changed my mind and switched it to being up at the top of my card. But I'm gluing this background down right over top of it. I didn't use any dimension on this. I ended up putting those flowers up on some foam tape, so I thought that was going to be enough dimension on this card. So that's the finished card, and I think that's the way this die was intended. I've just added in the happy birthday at the bottom and a few little pearls. But here's another idea for how you might want to use this die. So here you can see I've got it going in the opposite direction, and I'm leaving a border, so that cutting edge is just on the outside of the edge of my 5.5 by 4.25 inch piece of cardstock. And then I changed direction, so I'm alternating the way this die will go. And I wasn't too worried about those edges because I ended up putting a frame around this. So I wasn't too worried, but I did want to keep something. So there you can see it with the frame on it, and I've just alternated the direction of the die, which I thought was kind of fun. It's a bit of a graphic look, and I just thought that was fun. So on the one on the left, I actually took some of those little cutout pieces and wove them through at the top and the bottom. And at one point I had it also in the middle on the right. I don't know why I took that one out, but it's another idea for you. I also thought that you could take these pieces and stagger them in different slots there, and I did different heights. And that sort of gave another look as well, which I thought could be quite fun. But here are the two cards I did do with these two pieces. So this one I've put a watercolor background in behind, and the cattails border, and then I think those are herons or maybe egrets, and they came from the Nature Stroll 3 die cuts, and that sentiment is one of the Paper Rose sentiments. I'll have everything listed below, you guys. So right now when I'm doing the voiceover, I don't quite remember what everything was, but I will list them. So that was that one, and then this is the other card. I just tucked some flowers in there and leaves, and the background is again from that watercolor paper pack, and the hello was cut from that same paper. So there's a couple of cards with a different look. Now this idea, somehow this die makes me think of a fence, and so I wanted to do this white on white, so I'm just gluing this right down to my card base. And I've just cut the one strip out of this one, but what I'm going to do here is inlay in alternating rows 2 layers of those die cut pieces. So I'm just going along and putting them in. Now you could change the color on these. You could add embossing or texture paste to these. You could add embossing powder. It could be so fun. So that's the look that you get. There's quite a bit of dimension just with 2 layers. And I thought that kind of gave it a bit of a fence look. So I've die cut the poppy bordered die there and colored them in. And to go on the bottom of those, these are the watercolor papers that I've been using. So I love that Paper Rose puts those patterned strips on the information strip, because I use those all the time. So I've glued that on, and I'm just trimming it down. And I thought that went quite well with those poppies. Now here's the finished card. I just added some of the etched butterflies and a sentiment. But I had all these little die cut pieces, and I thought there has to be something you can do with these. So I've laid them out on my cutting mat there, and I've got a 5.5 inch piece of card that I've covered with double-sided adhesive. Now, I'm doing what is called a grouting technique, so I am leaving a bit of space between all of these die cut pieces. But I just started by putting one of them down along the edge, and then I put the other one horizontally. And that way I knew how far over to go with the vertical pieces, because I did want them to sort of line up. So you can see here I'll line this one up at the end of that horizontal piece. And then I just found this easiest to go right in the middle and then stagger the other two. Now I did do mine quite even and symmetrical, but I like the look also of the ones on my desk, which are all kind of lopsided and topsy-turvy, and I think that could be a really fun look as well. I think also I'm using white, but you could color all of these. You could cut them from patterned paper, you could do an ombre look, you could put your glitter pastes and gels on these. I just think there's so many ways that you can use these little pieces. So maybe keep those in mind. But here is my finished piece. So in between all of those little strips is exposed adhesive. So this is the grouting technique now. So I'm just putting these gilding flakes in. These are from Cosmic Shimmer. And I'm just brushing them in because they will stick to all that adhesive that's down below the strips there. And you just brush them in. You could use your finger, you could use a little sponge, but they will stick to all of that. And when you're done, it's really quite pretty. So that's what it looks like with the gilding flakes. But you could also put glitter in there or little micro beads I've done. And they all have a slightly different look, so keep that in mind. Okay, so there's my finished card. I did trim those side pieces off. I just decided it looked better as a rectangular card, but I can still use those pieces. So I have used this Elodie flower builder die set for the flowers and the greenery one die for the leaves. And I did use the same gilding flakes, which are from Cosmic Shimmer. It's these Autumn Leaves gilding flakes. And a bit of gold foiled cardstock for the hello and the outline layer of the leaves. Okay, so here is another idea if you're still with me. This one is a bit more elaborate. I am cutting these straight up and down. This is a 5.5 by 4.25 inch piece of cardstock. And here you can see I have shifted it so that that cutting edge is just on the other side of where I've already die cut. Now I didn't quite get mine lined up correctly, but I just took my scissors and trimmed that off. And in the end, you don't notice this. It is shifted a bit on mine. I didn't really line that up terribly well. So you can see there, it's not great, but it will work. So what I did is I used this Be Happy pattern paper. I just thought that would be kind of fun. So I've cut some of that and I'm cutting it all down now into 1/4 inch strips. And so with my cutting machine, it's quite easy because the grids are all 1/4 inch wide. So I just shifted over one grid and I know that's a 1/4 inch. And I did keep all of these strips in order. So now I'm just going through, weaving these through my die cut background, in and out, in and out. And I have to say, this did not take very long. I think it was maybe 10 minutes to weave all this paper through this. So I thought that was kind of worth it in the end. But once I get that one piece in, I just slid it back down to the edge to make sure it stayed in place there. And then with the next strip, of course, I alternated which way it went in and out, just as you would with any kind of weaving. So I had just periodically kept pulling these along, making sure they were all snug up to each other and as tight as I could get them. And that's how it looked in the end, which I thought was really kind of a fun look. It's completely different than the paper itself was. And on the back, that looks like an Easter basket to me. So there's another idea. So to secure those, I just took regular tape, one-sided tape, and taped all of that down along the edges. And I've die cut a frame now from white cardstock, and I used the Lots of Rectangles die set. I used the largest one for that, so it's got that nice etched line to it. And I wanted to use the sunflower border die, but it didn't show up very well, so I am embossing it with my platform, and this is just the sandwich I used. And so once it's embossed, all the pieces are still there, and then I just took my Copic markers and colored it in. I pretty much scribbled. It really wasn't very fancy coloring. But then that white outline die, I used that spray adhesive and glued it on over top, so that cleaned up all that coloring. And here I am just fussy cutting it out. Now I'm holding my scissors at a bit of an angle so that I'm cutting underneath that white outline without cutting the outline itself. And now I've got some glue down, and I'm just centering that sunflower border in the middle of my frame. Just pressing it down, and then I can trim off all the excess on both sides of that. So once I had this in place, I decided I wanted some dimension. Now, Sam Calcott of Mixed Up Crafts has done this a few times. I've seen her do this in videos. So I've cut a piece of cardstock that is 1.5 inches wide by, I think it's 5.5. It's the length of the frame. And so all I'm going to do here is score this, that frame, the width of that frame is 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to score every 3/8 of an inch on that 1.5 inch wide piece of card. And that will give me 4 evenly spaced lengths now on this little strip. And I did that twice. So there's one for each side of this frame. And then I just accordion folded these, so mountain valley mountain folds. And so what you're left with now is this sort of M-shaped spring, basically. So I'm now gluing that onto the long side of my frame, and I glued this onto both sides. And you can see how it gives it that little spring there. So then once I had that, I've already glued this woven piece down to my card base, and I'm just going to glue this frame down on top of that. And I put this under blocks just to, really let it set up before I started adding the final decorations to it. So there it is. Now you can see all the dimension that those springs give it. It's quite fun, but it does close right down flat for mailing. Now I had that sentiment, and it was just too wide for my card, so I've cut a little strip of acetate. I cut the sentiment in half, and I wanted it to sort of go somewhere in the middle there, so I've cut this little piece of acetate that is just the width of my frame. And you can see I've put a little piece of double-sided tape on both ends, so it will fit just across there. And so I can remove that backing paper, and I sort of go in diagonally and then rotate it around so that it gets in where I want it to go. And once I have it where I think I want it to fit, I can just push that frame down onto it, and it will pick up that double-sided tape and stick in place. So you can see it there. Now I had this little die cut gnome, and I've put some double-sided tape where he will go across the acetate, and I'm just adding a bit of glue on the outside edge where he will attach to the frame of my card. So just tucking him in place there. And then I put some double-sided tape on this part of the sentiment and removed the backing paper, and I'm just sticking it down to that acetate. So that sentiment actually floats away from the back of the card, which is kind of fun. And this one I've glued down, and all that I had left was one of the little die-cut bees that I thought would be kind of fun to go on the sunflower. So that's the last card that I have for you. I think it's kind of fun with all the dimension, and it's totally different from you would expect from that one horizontal die. So there's a few ideas for you there. I hope I've given you a little inspiration, and I hope you're having a great day. Thanks for joining me. Bye.